This is putting Pivotal Platform to the hybrid cloud test, and this is the Azure focus, so there may be others in the future. Keep an eye out. AWS, GCP, you name it, maybe we'll figure it out. So what I want to do is actually present to you today a journey that we have taken, a quest we have taken toward our public cloud push for Pivotal Platform to be in a public cloud. We began our journey in Azure, and so naturally we wanted to put Pivotal Platform in Azure as well. We have a pretty strong base on-prem, and last year I talked a bit about the transformation our team took as we brought Pivotal Platform online, and our team transformed, and with the help of Pivotal, actually the dojos, we transformed our teams in agile practices, and our methodologies shifted up quite a bit. So just looking back a little bit, I demonstrated some of our numbers last year, and this slide is a little bit different, but now we are joined by First Data, a small company you may have heard of, and so our numbers have increased a lot, in fact. So the one that I wanted to point out, just kind of an idea of the sheer size that the company is at this point. We were at 5.8 billion last year in revenue, and now we have a projected revenue of over 15 billion. So it's a big number to achieve, a lot more zeros than I can even comprehend. And as I think as we'll see, the Pivotal Platform is helping us increase some of this volume, some of the transaction volume that we're seeing, the speed at which our apps are going into production. So all of these things are helping Fiserv. And so all the way to the top, there is support and acknowledgement of Pivotal Platform and products going into public and even hybrid cloud offerings. So just a look at our Pivotal Platform then. We've got 8 foundations, 4 data centers now, and 6 zones within those data centers. We have over 2,100 applications sitting out there. There were more than 7,400 app pushes. I believe this was a July metric that we pulled. And then we have 130 orgs, and yet 0 dysfunction within all of those various organizations. 0, right?
0.
Mostly.
That's the story.
So we do have a lot out there now, and I will point out that our foundations represent perhaps a resiliency and a growth potential. So we don't necessarily have 8 foundations because we consume that much real estate and infrastructure, but we do want to position ourselves across the nation. We do want to make ourselves available to all the back-end systems that might process these applications in the various geographic regions that they live in. So we had to distribute our foundations out. And with 8 foundations, what's a couple more? Let's just throw in a couple more. So we decided to go to Azure, obviously. The question of cloud, you have all these on-prem systems. Why would you go to cloud? I think it was less of when and definitely, or less of a why and more of a when you would go. We wanted to get into cloud for a lot of different reasons, and there was the notion when we first began our journey in Pivotal Platform that this was a hybrid cloud offering. It is cloud agnostic. We wanted to be sure that wherever we went in the future, that this platform would be there with us and that our application transformation would be minimalized by that. And I actually will jump to the punchline a little bit. So the talk is about putting this to the hybrid cloud test. And in fact, I can tell you, I got a quote here. So a retrospective occurred recently with one of our business units. The point that we made was that there was very little learning curve for our developers to adapt and begin pushing code to Azure, the Pivotal Platform in Azure. And they stopped us and said, I want to correct that statement. It wasn't very little, it was actually 0 learning curve. So we were very proud to hear that the development community, some of them didn't even realize when they were pushing to on-prem and when they were pushing to Azure. So that was a phenomenal success for the platform and our enablement teams to do all that. So that was the quote that I got from them. I thought that was really important. So that is our punchline. We were successful. Don't leave yet, though, because that's also the reason why you want to find out how we made it possible, how we were able to take what we learned on-prem and push that into the cloud. Okay, so when you choose to push into Azure, you're going to get a couple of options. You'll actually have a few. You could probably do this in a very mundane way, stack some VMs out there as IaaS, grab an ISO. I don't know. You could probably do this in a very mundane way. But the options that were given were an Azure Marketplace opportunity. This is very much a UI-driven design where you basically answer all the questions that make up the installation of Pivotal on your environment. And then there's another option that we can use that is more of an infrastructure as code option, and that is using Terraform. And we were interested in this, but didn't know how to attain this yet. So we just thought, well, let's start going down that road. We'll start with the UI, and then we'll also dabble with Terraform and figure that out. Because we knew that we wanted to get into Terraform. We knew that we needed infrastructure as code. But we found that Pivotal does provide a template for you to begin that. And that was a great starting point. And we'll get into some of the differences then that we found with that and what we did. The first thing you have to consider, though, is the design of what Azure is going to look like. And if any of you have talked to Microsoft and or perhaps any cloud vendor and discussed what your environment should look like, you may have heard of a hub-spoke design. So this model basically demonstrates a networking design, a networking topology. And in that topology, you've got a centralized hub that may house a lot of your utility services or your management services, perhaps some of your core networking, perimeter security, things like that. And then each of the spokes that you see are going to be maybe subscriptions, maybe resource groups, any sort of subdivision that you need. And then the VNet distinction is going to be unique in each one of those spokes. So we have different networks that all of these things represent. And both of the models that I showed you before, the Azure Marketplace, the Terraform model, they're going to work in this just fine. There's not going to be a problem. The problem comes when we add this little bubble, when I want to then introduce data center connectivity to my Azure implementation. And for those of you who have done this, maybe you used ExpressRoute, maybe you used VPNs, but now I have a network complexity that goes far beyond just the island or the isolation that was my cloud environment. And now I have perhaps duplicate IP problems that I need to think about, overlapping IP ranges. Maybe I'm concerned about NAT ranges. So in our case, we designed this in a way that we didn't have overlapping IPs, that we carved out a space so that we could build Azure so that it really is just an extension of our on-prem network. And then taking you back to the Wayback Machine when we first began, so this was our first diagram of Azure, and I think it actually, it looks close enough to the official diagram, right? So this was my napkin drawing, basically, and you can see at the top left, infrastructure as code, Terraform, that was the initial thought here, and all the elements are there. You've got kind of the idea of spokes coming off of a central hub, and Mr. Cloudman blowing down to the data center. I think it's all there. So then what does it take to get all of this done? I've got some preparation bits that we need to cover before we can do this. The first of which is going to be Terraform itself. And specifically in Terraform, we really need to focus in on the providers. And in this case, it's the Azure RM provider and possibly the Azure AD provider if you want to do some bonus work. So I've spent most of my time in that Azure. I highlighted it here for you to see. There's a provider section that goes into all the documentation for resources and data sources regarding the capabilities, the functionality that you get with Azure. And it's going to be a unique experience. The context or the syntax is a little bit different from what you might see with AWS or any of the other providers out there, but the workflow is the same. And that's what makes Terraform a good tool for this, because I can adapt a workflow that works for us, and then regardless of the provider that I choose, then I'm able to follow that same life cycle and same workflow. The next thing that we need is OM. Perhaps some of you have seen this before, but if you go to the GitHub OM page, then you're faced with that memorable image. And I'm sorry, did that animate? Yeah,
it did.
Okay, so it didn't on my screen. It's great. So you're going to need OM, that is on a GitHub repo, and you're going to need textplate, which is a Pivotal provided piece of software that they use. It's basically a search and replace. Would you call it that? Search and replace?
Yeah, interpolation.
Interpolation. Okay, very good. And then, of course, there are some GitHub elements beyond this. And notably, at the very top, I noted a jump box. You will probably need a jump box. For the OM and for textplate, you're probably going to need a jump box to access these networks. But interestingly, for Terraform, you do not need the jump box. Terraform is going to interface with the API for Azure, and so it can reach out to it from the outside, from the inside, from the cloud CLI, any of these things. But there are cases where you're going to need that jump box as well. So a couple of other things on here. We've got AZ CLI and JQ. If you're familiar with these, it's a query tool. And then UAC and Bosch are obviously going to be a part of your solution, although we did not use that in our demonstration today. So anything else I needed to point out on that previous slide? Oh yes, so I wanted to actually point out in Terraform, Terraform is built around state, so it's kind of a desired state implementation. I want to build out a intentional configuration of what I want my infrastructure to look like, or my software, and then I'm going to deploy that, and it's going to build out a routine, a set of scripts that will fulfill what my desired state is. In doing so, I need to be considerate of, and I'm going to jump out for just a moment if I can, I need to be considerate of the layers that Terraform makes up. And of course that didn't work because it's a different monitor. Let me throw this over there. Pretty good. Okay, got it. All right, so I'm bringing your attention over to the pivotal provided template for terraforming your Azure implementation into Azure. And so what I wanted to show was here some of the layers that you have built into the terraforming process. So I'll use the laser or perhaps the mouse. I'll use the mouse. Can you see the mouse okay out there? Okay. So I'm going to point to some of the elements. So the key here is going to be this PaaS module. And within PaaS, I'm going to have, these are pretty standard terraforming elements. I'm going to have a main, outputs, and variables. The main is where all the real work occurs. And so within this is going to call modules that then fulfill all the other infrastructure duties that we have. So the layer here is that I have this context that I want to deploy PaaS. PaaS includes the opsman. It's going to include some infrastructure elements. And so as modules, those all call out to those elements and build them out according to our properties that we throw into it. This works pretty well, but if you think about it, and as we have seen on-prem, when we do our platform deployments, sometimes things don't go great with those, and we might need to try again. Maybe we pull things out and we go and apply PaaS again, but opsman is good, right? It's solid. So Terraform will allow you to do that incrementally. So I can make subtle changes at whatever layer I want to apply this. I can introduce change. Terraform's going to figure out what the delta is, and it's going to apply that change. However, there's another context here in Terraform. There's the creation, and as such, it's the alpha and the omega, right? There's also the destruction of opsman and everything that you built with this state. So in this case, maybe I want to get rid of PaaS, but I don't need to get rid of opsman just yet. So I might want to peel them away in layers. But if I do it all in one stroke like this, I don't have those distinct layers unless I go and modify the code. And I shouldn't need to do that to get that result. So what happens is if I do a Terraform destroy, it's going to destroy everything that was called as a module inside of this process. And I might need to actually break those out. So as you'll see in our modified version of the code, which I have to move over as well, it is a hot mess for one, but besides that, it is also broken out into individual elements. So instead of just being the modules, it is still counting on the modules, the template that Pivotal provided us, but in addition to that, we've broken them out into distinct Terraform execution operations that have their own individual state. So if we want to go and peel out just Harbor, just MySQL, just PaaS, then we have the opportunity to do a Terraform destroy on just that object and rebuild it distinctly. And there are still maybe use cases why we could bring all of this together in one Terraform module and still run it that way. But this is working for us right now. And the way that we can then bring this together, and Brian Smith will show you this in just a moment, is through effectively a pipeline, or through some sort of scripted process where I call each of these elements to execute. So I get the same end result, but I have a little bit more granularity and selection in what I'm deploying, when I'm deploying it, what I'm pulling out, when I'm pulling it out. And the only cost, I'll say, to entry on this particular design is managing variables. And Brian has done some creative work to help manage that, but it's still not perfect. So what I want to point out as we go into this demo is that beyond anything, this is an evolution. And we've taken what Pivotal has provided us, we are modifying on that, and I think we stopped making changes Friday, Saturday?
I tried.
Yeah,
I tried.
yeah. So stop making changes, because it's an evolution. We can make changes to this thing forever and keep getting more value out of it. And there is no end in sight. There's just more value that we can get. So this is an incredibly powerful tool for us to deploy the environment in a consistent, reliable, repeatable way, multiple locations in Azure, multiple foundations. And we, in fact, are going to take this and bring it back on-prem where we're running vSphere CPIs for Pivotal Platform. And we can apply this exact same thing as a different provider to our on-prem installation. So the last thing I'll show you before I move on, I think, to Brian's section is this idea of contracts and, well, non-contracts or other details. So one of the things that we got by splitting this out when we took these modules apart and broke them apart, the other reason why we had to break things out was because we are not a one-man shop. We are not responsible for everything in Azure, and I think you'll find in most enterprises that maybe you're in charge of the Pivotal platform, but somebody else gave you the network. Maybe you're in charge of the network, but somebody else is dictating firewall rules, things like that. We are definitely in that boat. So in our position, and we compare this largely to more of a service provider customer standpoint. So we are service providers for our customers, which might be the developers, but we are also customers to our network team who provide the network service to us. So what happens with that then is that we have, and I don't think you can see the laser at all, but we have these requirements there to know exactly what our network names are. We have resource groups, we have VNet names, some of that actually, so we used to include the subnets, but we can actually just inquire within and get the subnets out. But if they change those, then we have to change our code. So we put them in as contracts because we are completely dependent on them to provide us those values, and then it feeds into our whole process. So that's another reason why we broke things out a little bit the way that we did. Is there anything else I should add there?
No, I think that allows us to also easily transfer between environments because that information is going to be different wherever we go. So we have one place we can go and reference the correct values.
That's right. And yeah, to that point, if you extrapolate this and put it into a pipeline, a release kind of standing, then you're going to feed these values in as variables through your pipeline. So it super simplifies your way to deploy this to multiple environments, multiple regions. And some of these, actually there are some variables that are going to be missing. So as we make this available publicly on GitHub for you to use, some things are missing and we'll document that. But the idea is that you're going to have secrets. And so those secrets you're going to have to supply in other ways. And it may be that you do so through a vault or a cred hub or even environment variables, but these are going to be standard practice kind of things for Azure and for Terraform. Okay, well, let's see. I think, Brian, that I can cue you up here.
All right.
Let me go ahead and switch over, and we'll take a look at the guts, as it were.
All right, so I have a fun little demo here. So Pivotal did a great service by providing the foundation for everything we're running here. Let's see here. Okay, so this is a little breakdown of what we're going to do through this script. Pivotal's what they provided expected that you would have Concourse. We didn't want anything. We wanted a fresh environment where there's just nothing out in Azure yet. So we decided on a bash script to run through this. We run it on a jump box that's out in Azure so that it can download all of the PivNet tiles, upload them to OpsMan, and configure them. So the script starts by terraforming OpsMan. During that terraform process, it downloads the OpsMan image. It builds the VM of OpsMan and creates the storage accounts. From there, it goes over to terraforming PaaS. With PaaS, it will create the load balancers that it needs for TCP, the Diego cells, the MySQL, and what was the third one? Fourth one?
You said Harbor already?
No, that's coming up. And it creates more storage accounts and adds those variables that we need to reference later on into the TF state. Here next, we terraform PaaS windows. And you can see we're doing something a little differently with Terraform. Terraform is really designed to build out objects and to really run a state that, if that state changes, something happens within Azure to reflect that change. We are just using that as a variable storage location so that we can go and reference that data and pull it out into our script. So we go from PaaS, we terraform HealthWatch the same way. Harbor is a little similar, but we also build a load balancer with Harbor. We go on to Azure Service Broker, just add some variables in. Move on to Splunk, still variables. Redis, MySQL, all just throwing variables into a TF state. Terraforming PKS, that again builds out a load balancer, creates a load balancer rules and more variables into the TF state. We come into configuring OpsMan. When we configure OpsMan, this gives us the time that we can tell it which authentication. If we're using SAML, if we're using LDAP, or if we're just going to use a local authentication source. We also set our certificate that we have defined so that we don't get that nasty IE error that won't let us into manage our OpsMan.
Edge, though, now, right?
Edge, yes, sorry. Yeah. The next is downloading the products. This is what takes the very most time, to download everything from PivNet. As expected, it's just a lot of data to download and then turn around and upload to OpsMan. Next, we go through and we configure all the tiles. So everything is completely configured when this is all done and ready to run the apply process. After that, you celebrate however you would like. Beer, what have you. All right. So through this demo, in the respective time, we are not going to build OpsMan. OpsMan is already out there. We are not going to download the products. And the way the script is defined, it's just a collection of functions. You can do this in any order to a point. Like you could download the products before you terraform, or vice versa. So here we've already downloaded the products and we're ready to terraform.
Just as a note, one of the things that we modified late Friday or Saturday, we were trying to speed things up, so we actually pulled the image creation process of OpsMan out and made it sort of a prerequisite of running through all of these Terraform processes. It's useful because it takes some of the elements that take a lot of time, makes them out of band. It also takes out the aspect that if you rerun the script without setting certain flags, it might rebuild OpsMan if you're not careful. So this made it very clear that that was not going to happen because the image was separate from the rest of the Terraform process.
Yes, and you don't want to really rebuild OpsMan without your state or your backup. That's not good. When everything's said and done with the demo and the apply runs, this is what we end up with. We have I know it's a little bit of a mess, hodgepodge mess here, but we end up with a number of load balancers sitting out in front of the services. All these load balancers have their HealthWatch rules set up, all of the firewall rules set up to allow connectivity in. And you can see all the different components back here. We'll end up with 5 different networks, VNets, that are already pre-configured. Those are handed over to us by our network team. So let's do a little demo here. So here on the right, we have OpsMan. On the left, we have the script that's going to run. You know what? I did not log into Azure.
You need your phone?
I bet. No, I don't. All right. Okay. Here are the resources we're starting with in Azure. You can see there's not a lot out there. We've pre-staged this out where we have a few storage accounts, and we have our Ops Manager server over there. So we're going to start with, that did not look good. All right, so we're going to start this little demo. We're going to dance our little dance. All right. And it's going through, it's pulling the state down right now from our storage account for OpsMan and comparing that to what's out there and what it knows about. If anything changes, it will go and apply that change. We've already moved into PaaS, and PaaS, as I mentioned before, is going to be configuring the load balancers,
Watch closely because we're going to test you on some of the values that go
quick.
by.
All right, so it's going out and configuring the load balancers and, sorry, refresh. There we go. I just need to make that column a little bigger. All right. So here are the load balancers. We have the web, we have the TCP, MySQL, Diego SSH. That was the 4th one. Diego SSH build out. You can see it's just moving along very fast and continuing to build out everything that we have defined. Mainly the load balancers, load balancer rules, and defining that connectivity. All along, it's building the states, entering the variables into the state and uploading them to the storage account. All right, we're already on to OpsMan. So let me switch over here to OpsMan. You can see all these tiles have been staged. All right. Oh, demo gods. All right. Okay, so are you kidding me? All right, let's go full screen here. Nope.
So we have a good screenshot of what this looks like, but maybe not a live view.
Okay, so right now it's going through and configuring director. Through this configuration, it is going to be setting all of those networks that were predefined and setting all the configurations in there. This normally goes very quickly if the environment has connectivity to everything to verify. Right now in our demo environment, it's isolated, doesn't have connectivity, so it's going to take a little bit longer than normal here.
So just fun fact, we call this actually Turtle Island, and that is because it is our little isolated island, and we've always called this process turtling because it's very methodical. It goes through and does everything at its own pace. It's successful in doing so, but it can take longer.
All right, so here we are. We're over to Ops Manager, and you can see right now nothing is configured. It's going to be running through Director and configuring all of the Azure information, all of the networks, and making those settings set in there. Right here, it does take a little bit. There's actually an unhandled exception in OpsMan that when you try to apply a network setting to a subnet that it can't connect to or validate against, it throws an exception. It won't let you go beyond that. So maybe we can talk about that. All right, so here is our little 2-minute Song
Okay,
and
2 minute
dance?
mark.
You got song and dance you
Yeah,
can do?
yeah. So the star of the show right now actually is OM. We said before that some of the precursor, the things that you need to get set up for are OM and textplate. OM is the thing that is going through and doing all of this configuration work. So it's going to siphon in all of these variables from the state right now, the Terraform state. And sorry, I'll move over here just so that I'm not over there. So it's going to pull in all of the state information, and textplate is going to do the work of interpolating that data and transitioning that into values that go into the manifests for these tiles, for the Bosch deployments, and for the configuration within OpsMan itself. So that's the real star here, and this is the thing that if you've done an OpsMan or PaaS delivery, going through all those fields, you know how to do it, but it takes you a while to go through them, and to document them, it's fairly verbose. So this is a way for us to capture all of that stuff using Terraform state today, but in the beginning I said this was an evolution. So we won't always use the state. The state is, in Terraform, a really sensitive subject. You don't want to just hand your state out to anybody. That is something that you want to keep internal to your team because it holds all of the secrets to your kingdom, even the ones that you didn't know you were releasing. So you have to be careful with that. And in fact, you don't check it in. It is stored in a back end that is secured, or it is stored locally on your machine, and you don't check it into source code. So we are putting our data in there. Eventually, we'll put it into a key value repository. You think it could be in CredHub, it could be in Console, it could be in almost anything. We just have it here for the moment.
Yes, and going through this process also keeps you from that accidental fat finger of an extra octet or what have you that will bite you later. Okay, so we're past that little exception issue, and if we come over here and we refresh, we should be able to see that it's moving right along in configuring the tiles, and it goes through this very fast. You can see here in directory.
There's a green light. That's pretty exciting.
We got one. Only a few more. All right, so you can see your subscription. All of your information in here is set. Everything is in there, ready to go. You can see your networks are all defined in here. They're ready to go, ready to be used. Like I said, there's just a little exception in here that prevents it from getting down to assigning networks just because we're an isolated demo environment that we're working through. Okay, let me jump back over to this script so we can watch it go through. You can see through Ohm, if you've ever used it, this is something you've already seen. Just going through, configuring the products, downloading the states, just setting everything that you have defined. I planned on having them side by side, but it doesn't look like it's going to work.
The browser didn't like that.
Yeah,
But you can see the refresh occurring, more green lights.
Yeah, so one by one, it's going through, it's configuring it, getting all of these settings applied. It's going to PaaS. You can see in PaaS, go into resource config. You'll see that the load balancers are not set. Oh, that's PaaS Windows, I'm sorry. PaaS. And you can see the UAA has been configured. All of the certificates have been inserted in. Everything is ready to go. Over here in resource config, you can see all your load balancers have been set. They're ready to go.
The real value here is that every property that you see in these tiles is being configured by this process. So we have captured what those values should be inside of our infrastructure as code. We apply them. You can set any property to these. You can set the value for any property that exists in these tiles now or in the future. And there are some tricks for you to keep it up to date. Obviously, you have to find out what those new values are. Or if you're going to switch your CPI and say convert this over to AWS or to your on-prem vSphere implementation, then your values are going to be different, and you'll have to discover what those values should be.
Yeah, the values are primarily going to be different in the director and OpsMan configuration. All the tiles, they should translate from on-premise to Azure to AWS, wherever you would like. Once I got the process down, any new tile that we wanted to add, it took about 30 minutes to go through and understand all of the variables, all the values that need to be set, and then it just ran and it was configured. So once you get the process down, there is not a lot to it. And as the script is going, I can show you. The script is just a collection of functions. And this logic can be put anywhere. It can be moved into Concourse. It could be moved into possibly DevOps, wherever you would like these functions to run. And like I said, there's really not much to it once you get it going. You can see we use an OM to configure the product. We used textplate to reference the config. And we use JQ to pull the data out of the state, out of this PaaS state that we've downloaded. And that's what configures the product.
And again, before we said we're using state here, perhaps inappropriately, but it works flawlessly. Literally, we could put anything in place of that and run JQ against that as long as it's a JSON packet.
Yeah.
But other values would work here as well. If your source was YAML, you might use a different product to parse through that for you.
Yes, and as Olaf mentioned before, we just have all of these different tile configurations over here. And again, if you used OM, you'll recognize this property file. And you can see in here, maybe I didn't pick a good one. Let's pick director. So you can see the different values referenced in here. And again, the download out on PivNet, it's done a lot of this. It's built a great foundation. We just kind of made it work for us, changed it around a little bit.
I like to think of it as the great Lego spaceship. They gave us one and it's pretty cool, but we wanted to break it up and get all those pieces and build a new spaceship.
Yes. The whole process, once it finishes, is about 10 minutes. So that's pretty good for configuring, I don't know, however many tiles we have here. That's a lot of tiles.
I can tell you that's a lot quicker than we did it by hand.
Yes, and more accurate than we did it by hand.
What?
In the middle of the night in our 8th foundation. Okay, so we're done. We have a fully configured environment here, ready to go, just waiting on the apply to run, and it's a
then
full
begins
foundation.
the turtling process.
Yes, the turtling process. And like I said, once you go through this and you have Bosch deployed, you can then take it a little bit further and do the same process for Concourse, for CredHub, for Vault, Prometheus, whatever Bosch deployment is out there, whatever new tiles come up, it's very easy to do once you figure out the process.
You can switch back to the slide deck as well if you're done with that.
Okay. Oh, let me change. I don't think that likes me changing my desktop, but let's see. Oh, it did. All right.
I didn't do a good job of introducing us before, but we are, there it goes. I'm Olaf Gradin, Principal Platform Architect, also one of the Pivotal Vanguards. This is Brian Smith. He and I have collaborated greatly on this platform that we have. He's done a great deal of this work on the menu, on the scripting procedures for these tiles, on the discovery work that it took to figure out what the values are that are going to go into this and feed the whole system. So like I said, OM is a real star of this show. I love what it did. It made it so that we could deliver reliably this platform across any number of foundations, across any number of data centers. So as we continue to grow, as Fiserv continues to grow, we can now deliver this platform solidly to any business unit that needs it. And we do have some resources here, so as this deck becomes available to you, you'll be able to, you can take a picture of this, of course, but you'll also be able to reference this. At the bottom, we do have some GitHub resources that we're going to provide that will have Brian's menu, some of the other script work that went into developing this process. So you'll be able to see how we transformed what Pivotal provided in the template. And these are the source locations for some of that material so that you can go out and do the discovery on your own. I encourage everyone, if you are doing Pivotal platform deployments, to figure out how you can instrument it as infrastructure as code. This is the way that it's going to make it a competent managed service in your environment. And in doing so, I would also encourage you to do kind of the same thing. You can take what we've done and work with that, but tear it apart, like really understand the components that go into this delivery, because we've commented out things like DNS that didn't matter to us because of the way that our DNS structure is built. So we knew that we had scripts that could go and build DNS separately anyway, and so we're doing that, and that may change over time. But your environment may be different. So understand what these modules do, understand what the components do, understand what you need to take out, and likewise understand what you need to add. I mentioned at the very beginning the Azure AD provider. That is another provider in Terraform. That gives you the ability to go and grab groups and assign RBAC roles to the resources that you create. So if that's something that's important to you, it's not in the templates that are out there today, but it's a way for you to extend what has been given to you. So with that, I think we're done. We'll take questions if you've got any.
Please.
Yeah.
So you guys use the same automation for your on-premises?
We don't yet. So there is actually a great deal of automation, and that's where you want to talk about your script, its beginnings, its humble beginnings.
Yeah, so we have something similar on-premise that we use through Concourse. I think this is going to lay the foundation that we can lead towards a desire of repaving, that we can, delete something and just run this process and everything's back the way it was. So that's one of the desired states there.
So you guys are creating all your orgs and spaces within PaaS also?
So the question was asked, are we creating our orgs and spaces within PaaS? Is that right?
We are not there, but it wouldn't be hard to do that.
Yeah, and we're probably a little unique in that a lot of that is actually distributed model. So we're the platform team that doesn't necessarily we manage like all the way down to the development level. We have the fortune of having an enablement team as well. And so we have this group that is a liaison with our development groups, and they actually facilitate a lot of the process of onboarding a business unit or an entire a development group. And so in doing so, they're going to bring in orgs and spaces, and they may be scripting that out, or they may be even empowering the business unit to own some of that themselves.
Yeah, a lot of that's done through an onboarding process, and if we did go the repaving route, that is definitely a component that we need to address and figure out. Yeah.
So the natural question of that is, what does your repaving of your platform look like? How often are you repaving?
And that question was, how often are we repaving, and what does that repaving process look like? Okay.
We're not doing that yet. We want to. Right now, this was the desired outcome of this was to just get a fresh environment out into Azure, fully configured and easily configurable. We have done our lower environment. We're going to be building out an Azure upper environment, and comparable to the amount of time that we spent doing this manually and upper, it takes this long, with the exception of downloading the tiles. Total, even downloading the tiles, I'd say about 2 hours we have an environment out there.
And we can pre-stage some of that work now.
Yeah.
Now you were talking about repaving, so there is some amount of repaving that occurs just within the platform itself.
Right.
And we certainly take advantage of that.
Okay, right. And do you do that on-prem currently?
Mhm.
Yeah, that's all.
Yeah.
How often are you guys doing that?
As often as there are updates that make us
Yeah.
repave things, right?
Yeah.
You're keeping up as they come out. And it's,
Yeah, do you want to mention the pipeline? There's a Concourse pipeline that automates some of and this is in lower as well, right?
Yeah.
It pulls down the updates automatically, applies them to the foundations, so that's a recurring process in lowers.
Yeah.
is that a tough thing to get buy-off from your other department?
In production or in lowers?
You're not doing that production.
Right.
Yeah, so we're not automating it. It's automated that a lot of that manual work is out of the way of downloading the tiles, staging the tiles, configuring the tiles, but we're not to the point of automating an apply just because of the change control requirements and things like that. Yeah.
In terms of the question, though, is it difficult to manage, I guess, the expectation with development in regards to what we're doing in the platform? I think probably one of the places that we struggled with that in the beginning most was around build packs. Our platform was deploying build packs with the platform, right, continuously, and some of our development groups were not pinning their version. or maybe they were pinning the version and we got rid of that version
Yeah.
because it's old. So we've had to take another look at our relationship with build packs and the platform. And this is still something that we're modeling, but our preference moving forward is that this is another area where we divide things, right? The platform can be responsible for the platform without also being responsible for the build pack. And so we want to put a divide there and say, you can use the platform build packs, but they are platform build packs and they do this thing, right? They continually move. If you have specific requirements from a build pack, then go and get that build pack, put it into an on-prem repo, and maintain a pinned version to that. All right, any other
Hey.
questions?
Given the fact that you guys
Do we know each other? Shashir was in our dojo in the beginning, so I'm madly impressed that you're here with us
Yes.
to see our growth. So that's pretty exciting.
Quite pleased with it. So given the fact that you guys have diverged from like the master branch of the templates and like the mainline code, have you had any issues integrating any of those upstream changes into your templates, or have you not had to do that yet?
Yeah, so the question is, since we've diverted, we've forked a good bit, how do we then bring back in the upstream changes? That is a great question, and it is something that I only thought about this past weekend when I wanted to go back and look to see where it was. Fortunately, it had not changed a lot from when we last looked at it, but that is something that when we began on this journey of taking apart the Terraform, we actually didn't expect to ever go back. The impression that I got looking at the template was that it is really just not even so much of a template, but more of just here's what is possible. Mm-hmm. Here's an example of a way that you can deploy the Pivotal platform in its entirety, networking, functional bits, security rules, all of these things. It's open to the internet, right? It expects a public IP, and that's how you're going to interface with it. So we just kind of abandoned that and said, well, this is a great example, great use case, but it's not going to work for us, and we need to form our own that will be distinct. And originally, my thought was that we were going to completely destroy it, start from scratch, and just take the lessons that we learned and implement them in our own process. In the end, we didn't have to do quite as much of that. It was really just a reorganization of what things were occurring when and where the layers were. Now, I spoke of evolution in the very beginning. It's entirely possible that some point further down the road we have deviated so far that they don't resemble each other. And I also would be interested in a way to give back, right? Is there a way that we could provide some value back to Pivotal to say this is perhaps a different model that would work for more people in an enterprise standpoint and make it in such a way that it's generic and consumable by others?
Yeah, and I recognize where that gap is going to be are the property files. So Pivotal changes from, let's say, an underscore to a dash in a property name. That's bit us in the past. And that's where it would be nice to see that to come down. But honestly, there's only PKS and PaaS that are out there, the property files. So
the other thing that I just remembered too was that the template that's given banks on Concourse in your environment, which we happen to have, but in Azure we did not put Concourse out there, mainly because we didn't have anything out there, right? We barely had a VNet, and then we were ready to put Pivotal platform into it. So rather than going through the work of also putting out another, in our case we wanted to use Bosch Director to then deploy another Concourse instance, rather than going through all of that, we said, is there a way for us to do this without needing Concourse? Let's take what they were planning, the pipelines that they built for Concourse, can we adapt those to other tools? And so that's another reason why we thought we were deviating quite a bit from the norm.
You mentioned hybrid cloud, at the beginning with the network connectivity. Do you have like workloads that span the, clouds? Or
Oh yeah,
what's your intention?
That's a good question. Yeah, the question was asked for everyone else. Since it is hybrid cloud, did we have a real reason for going to hybrid cloud? Do we have workloads that actually span networks? We most assuredly do. There are business systems that live on premises. They are perhaps mainframe-based systems that will always live where they live today. And then we have workload that people want to distribute to the cloud that needs to reach back to those things. So the importance of not having to deal with NATs, the importance of having a non-overlap IP range, and the logical assumption that we've got this network connection between the two environments was really important to us to bridge that gap. And This solution made that really possible because an application that was deployed on-prem that was pointing to a resource that might have lived on-prem, well, now when it's in Azure, that same FQDN resolves to an IP that lives back on-prem. The IP is routable. As long as we've got firewall rules set up to allow that, then everything is seamless. And on paper, it always works.
Yes.
I'm back.
In your Terraform to get bars file, what medium did you guys use to generate your certs for SSL?
You hear the question?
Yes, do you want to repeat
Yeah,
that for
the
me?
question was what medium did we use to generate the key?
Yeah. So that was just provided in the variable file. So you could put it in the script. I just used OpenSSL to go out and generate a certificate. But you would, and this was just a self-signed cert. Normally, I would expect that you would go out and you would get a wildcard cert from a VeriSign, DigiCert, wherever, and then you just put that public and private key into your variables, into the variables that push it into TF state, and then it's in your state for reference.
And it was just a base 64 encoded certificate?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. All right, any other questions? Okay, we'll be available for a few minutes afterward if anybody has questions they think of shortly thereafter.
Yeah, thank you guys.
Thank you.